Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. If everybody can have a seat quickly, I'd appreciate it. We'd like to get started. We have a special presentation today from the Adventures in Bluegrass. Be polite and attentive. Again, as always, no electronic devices. I already confiscated several from the session before us. We have a great presentation today about the history and the art of bluegrass music, brought to us by the Adventures in Bluegrass Band with Bill Keith. The members of the band include Mr. Bill Keith himself, banjo extraordinaire, Fugate on the mandolin, Robert Stump on guitar, Fooch Fischetti on fiddle, and Highland High School's very own Roy Coates on bass. Enjoy.
Thank you, everybody. Hello and welcome to the second presentation of Bluegrass in Our Schools. Before we get started, I would like to thank Principal Evans, Dr. Harrington, and the Highland Central School District, along with the Hudson Valley Bluegrass Association, for their support of the program today, and the special free concert right here in the auditorium tonight at 7:30. And I hope you'll all come back because we're going to play everything a lot longer than. We'd like to start out today with a tune composed by the fabulous mandolin player. His name is David Grisman, and it's called Opus 57. In this piece, you heard a blending of bluegrass and jazz. This style of music was named dog music by Jerry Garcia, who actually started out playing the 5-string banjo. Jerry Garcia, by the way, was one of the founders of one of the longest-lasting rock bands in the 1960s. Anybody know who it was? That's right, the Grateful Dead. In the 1970s, after the Grateful Dead had been going for a while, Jerry Garcia actually reformed a bluegrass band called Old and in the Way, and they toured across the country for about a year. They recorded a couple of albums which sold very well. Anyway, with this song, I think that demonstrates how bluegrass has been a significant influence on American pop music. It actually came before rock and roll. And later on, we're going to find out what happened and why bluegrass is significant in learning about American music. Okay, so the real question is, how did this essentially hillbilly music from the South its way out into the American mainstream and beyond? Let's start with the technology and the invention of the record player, closely followed by the invention of the radio. The ability to record, capture the music and the musician's performance, and then to broadcast it made it possible for radio listeners to expand their musical taste beyond the musical styles that they were used to. They were hearing jazz, classical, race music, or blues. And as America was largely rural in the 1920s, the radio was filled with country music. This early recording of the Carter family that I'm getting ready to play for you over the speakers may have been received by a radio on a farm somewhere in America, much like this one right here to my left.
This Good Neighbor Get-Together program is going right on. And here's that original Carter family to do a little singing for you that we trust you enjoy. A.P., Sarah, Maybelle, Jeanette, Helen, June, and Anita, and they're all set to sing that familiar theme song, Keep on the Sunny Side.
Keep on sunny side, always on sunny side. Keep on sunny side of life. It will help us every day. It will brighten all the way. It will keep on sunny side.
That was the Carter family. As recording and broadcasting grew into a successful business venture, the search for artists began. Need an artist to play music for money during the 1920s or the Depression of the 1930s? No problem. Place a newspaper ad and a line of hungry performers would show right up there and make a line out in front of the building. The newly found artists like Jimmy Rogers and the Carter family became the first country music recording artists. Their music could be heard regularly on live radio broadcasts. Radio programs would typically be broadcast as the performers performed live in front of an audience. Shows would also feature comedians. And of course, advertising was a big part of that, with on-air mentions for flour or whatever. It's how the radio stations made their money, was through the advertising that they sold. So naturally, the popularity of the artist determined whether or not they would graduate from a smaller radio station to the next largest radio station and on up to the granddaddy of them all, the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. Bill Monroe was born on September the 13th, 1911. He died September 9th, 1996. He was the youngest in his family. He had two older brothers, Charlie and Birch, and all of them played instruments. Bill Monroe talks in this next little small short segment about his early life with his brothers and how he came to be playing the mandolin.
Oldest, and thought he was more of a boss than me and Charlie. And he decided he would be the fiddler, the leader. And Charlie, he was next in line. He wanted the guitar. And I guess I wanted the fiddle and guitar and all of them probably, and I wound up with the mandolin, and that was the deal of it.
Both of you mentioned that your mom played the fiddle. I wondered if you could think of a tune that she played that she rather favored on the fiddle.
She did like to play the fiddle, and like Charlie said, she'd leave the fiddle laying on the bed, and if she done her housework of a morning, a lot of times she would pass that fiddle, pick it up and play a tune. We thought she was the best in the world. I believe they called us tune. How old are you?
You know, it's an interesting thing about bluegrass. Whenever we go and play this kind of music, people will tend to start clapping, and that's the kind of music that it is, folks. It's very, once you listen to it, you kind of get hooked on it. And Bill Monroe is responsible for that in large part. Bill Monroe was influenced by two people early in his life. Influences are important to musicians, even the ones that you listen to today. So Bill Monroe was no different. One of his first influences was a black man by the name of Arnold Schultz, who taught him how to play the blues on the guitar. The other was his uncle on his mother's side, Penn Vanderburg, and he was a huge influence on Bill Monroe's life. And the sound that Penn Vanderburg got on the fiddle was kind of the concept that Bill carried throughout his life. This next interview, very short, is about Bill Monroe and his Uncle Penn.
Bill, I've heard you many times say that you give your Uncle Penn credit for your sense of timing in music, and I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about that and explain to the folks what you mean by his particular kind of time and how it relates to your sense of time.
Well, he played for most of the square dances when I was real young, and he had a wonderful shuffle with the bow, and he done his timing with that shuffle, and it seemed like that kind of washed off on me. I've kept that time in my mind, you know, ever since then, and it's helped me a lot.
You used to back him on guitar a lot, didn't you, when he played the square dances?
I have played with him quite a bit, you know, in his last days there. Or I say my last days because I left there when I was 18, and most of the boys had left there then, and he'd travel, you know, by either ride a horse or a mule, and lots of times he'd let me ride behind him, and we'd go way back in the country, you know, and maybe play for a square dance. He was the only fiddler around, and they knew that he would furnish good fiddling for their square dance.
Okay, the next tune we'd like to play by Bill Monroe is a tribute to his Uncle Penn, and it's called Uncle Penn. What's your right first?
Sing. Go down the pathway. I was fiddling, hung out the ball. It's time for him to
Bill Monroe's older brother Bart and Charlie started singing as the Monroe Brothers in the 1930s. They actually answered the ad when they got in line, got signed by a radio station. They performed and actually met with some success on RCA. But by 1938, as sometimes brothers do, they don't get along very well, and they split up. So Bill decided to form his own duet and hired a guitar player by the name of Cleo Davis. So Bill and Cleo went down to Atlanta and they auditioned for a couple radio stations, and they said, no. We've already got a brother duet. Maybe if you come back with a band. Monroe wanted to make it as a duet and was very stubborn. So they left Atlanta and they went to Asheville, North Carolina. And at radio station WWNC, they got hired under the condition that they hire more musicians. So this is kind of a first, folks. Bill Monroe, on the air, advertises, anybody interested in playing fiddle and bass in our band, show up at such and such a place for an audition. That resulted in their adding a bass player and a fiddle player. Well, by October, they had grown their audience, they'd gone up the ladder, and they made it to the big time. And that was the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee. The next song we'd like to do for you is one of the very early hits that Bill Monroe had. And it's a song that Cleo Davis had learned from his mother, taught it to Bill Monroe. The band learned it, went on stage at the Grand Ole Opry, live broadcast. And the name of the song is Footprints in the Snow.
Some folks like the summertime when they can walk about, strolling through the mellow green, it's pleasant, there's no doubt. Just give me the winter time when the snow is on the ground. Well, I found her when the snow is on the ground. I traced her footprints in the snow. I found her footprints in the snow. I missed that happy day. I never lost her way. And I found her when the snow was on the ground. I dropped in to see her, there was a big round moon. Mother said she just stepped out, she'd be returning soon. Every time the snow falls, it brings back memories. Well, I found her when the snow was on the ground. I traced her little footprints in the snow. I found her little footprints in the snow. I missed that happy day. I never lost her way. And I found her when the snow was on the ground.
Snow. Thank you. Kentucky is still known as the Bluegrass State, but that's not because Bill Monroe was from there. Kentucky had always had that nickname, just like New York is the Empire State, North Carolina is the Tar Heel State. Bill Monroe had strong ties to Kentucky, mainly because he was born there in the small town of Rosine. The next two songs we'd like to play are by Bill Monroe. Both have Kentucky in the title. The first one's called Kentucky Waltz, and I'll have something to say before the second one. Here we go, Kentucky Waltz. It's a slow one, so you gotta listen, okay? 2, 3, Kentucky Waltz.
Kentucky, beneath the beautiful harvest moon, and I was the boy that was lucky, but lost and dead too soon. As I said, Kentucky was.
How many of you saw Walk the Line? How many of you saw Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Okay, both are recent films that highlight country and bluegrass music. Are you beginning to understand why? Bluegrass has been around a long time, since 1938. There was bluegrass before there was rock and roll. Bluegrass and country kind of mixed together to make this kind of odd thing with electric instruments in the late 40s and 50s called rockabilly. And that's what Elvis was when he first started. There's a great 1950s and beyond guitar player by the name of Carl Perkins. And I have a little bit of an interview that Carl Perkins gave when he met Elvis. Perkins says, "I love blues and I love bluegrass. I had heard Blue Moon of Kentucky sung by Elvis, and I said, whoa. It was Bill Monroe influenced bluegrass, that up-tempo sound that turned me around in country music. Upon meeting Elvis, and here's the historical fact, Elvis said to me, Carl Perkins, 'Do you like Mr. Bill Monroe?' Bill Monroe. I said, 'I love Mr. Bill Monroe.' Then Elvis said, 'Man, I do too.'" Our next tune was on the King of Rock and Roll's very first hit record. Another tune by Mr. Bill Monroe called Blue Moon of Kentucky. It starts out slow, but there's a surprise in there. Listen up. In 1945, we had a 5-string banjo in the band, Bill Monroe's band. And that guy's name was Earl Scruggs, and he's still around. But he basically invented the 3-finger style banjo that you've heard Mr. Keith play this afternoon. Well, he and the guitar player at the time, Lester Flatt, both playing in Bill Monroe's band, they decided they could do better if they formed their own band and went off on their own. And that's what they did. Bill Monroe was not pleased. He had that spot at the top radio station in the late 40s at the Grand Ole Opry, and he wasn't going to share it with anybody. So Flatt and Scruggs were out on their own. They were touring around. And in the 1950s, technology happened. Anybody know what became around in the 1950s? No, the radio was already around. What came after the radio? That's right, television. So Flat and Scruggs. So Flat and Scruggs and the Foggy Mountain Boys got a call from CBS in the early 1960s. There was a new show coming on about some hillbillies from the mountains, and they needed appropriate music to go with that comedy. So Flat and Scruggs knew that Grand Ole Opry was tied up, so they said, yeah, we'll take it. And they performed this piece. That TV show went on to be a great big hit in the 1960s, ran for a long, long time, and it introduced bluegrass to the American mainstream once and for all. And we'd like to do the tune that made that happen. It's called The Ballad of Jed Clinton.
Story about a man named Jed. Poor mountaineer barely kept his family good. Then one day he was shooting at some food up through the brown coal, bubbling through. Oil, that is. Black gold, Texas tea. Well, the first thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire. Ken folks said, Jed, wait from there. In California is the place you ought to be. So load it up the truck and bedroom. Hills, that is. Swimming pools, movie stars. Say goodbye to Jed and all his men. They would like to thank you folks for kindly dropping in. You're all invited back next week to this locality. How he will help another hospitality. The Beverly Hillbillies, that's what they call it. Nice folks. Y'all come back now. Here.
Okay, we got time for one more, and it'll be time to go. We anyway, have a nice afternoon. Remember, there's a concert tonight at 7:30, and it's going to be a party up here on stage. But we hope you'll come back tonight at 7:30. It's free. Bring your neighbors, bring your friends, and we're going to end this with Blackbird Boston. I'd like to thank the Adventures of Bluegrass Band, Fooch Fischetti, Wayne Fugate, Robert Stump, the amazing Bill Keith on banjo, the legendary Bill Keith, and with good old Mr. Fooch. And Tom, our sound man, excellent sound man. Thank you, Tom, and to everybody at Highland High School who helped us. Thank you. Come back tonight, 7:30. We'll play everything and then some. Hey, Lynn, thanks for stopping over and representing the Hudson Valley Bluegrass Section.
Great, thank
Thank
you.
you.